Hey guys. What is today by the time we will be reading this Thursday? Happy Thursday. It should be around April 30th. And we are going to be reading today chapter 11, Returning to a Dangerous City. So think about that title and make some predictions about what our author might be experiencing during this time. Last we read, the war was over and she was hopefully going to be liberated, which means just freed and released to freedom. And she told us some details about Oskar Schindler and what happened to him after the war when everything was over, and what happened to his wife as well. So we are going to read about our author. And I want you to pay close attention to today, our standard skill, which is first-hand and second-hand account and author's point of view. So we're on our I 4.6. Hopefully by now you're remembering that R stands for reading, I stands for the informational text that we're reading this time period. And then 4 is our fourth grade, and 6 is our standard, our number standard. Today we're going to talk about author's point of view, which is our 6th standard in at this point. Okay, so hold on 1 second. Looks like I can still record. Sorry guys, I'm trying to see if I can record off the internet, but it looks like I can. Oh, but I can't get to our thing. Okay, hold on. Pause. Hold on. Okay, so let's see. These are our previous videos. I'm going to pause this again. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so our focus standard is going to be first-hand and second-hand accounts and author's point of view. And we're going to talk about Rena's point of view of this whole situation and how her first-hand account affects our perspective as readers. Okay? All right, mirrors on. I can describe how a first-hand account affects the reader's understanding of the author's point of view. Mirrors off. Okay, so try to recall, before we move on to the next slide, try to recall what a first-hand account is. We have a first-hand account and a second-hand account. Try to remember what that first-hand account, what that means, and try to remember what we mean when we talk about author's point of view. All right, ready? Okay, we have a first-hand account and a second-hand account when we talk about informational text, and it's asking us about who the author is. This correlates to when we talk about a narrator in literary text. But the thing is in a literary text, we don't always really have a narrator. Sometimes the story is being told from a third-person narrator, and that person's not involved at all. But with informational text, we always have an author. There's always going to be an author. And we're going to talk about how that author, this is especially relevant when we talk about historical texts and where that account is coming from. Is it a first-hand account or a second-hand account? So when we talk about a first-hand account, it's really similar to when we're talking about a primary source in social studies class. A first-hand account is when a text is written by an author who was there and experienced what they're writing about. And a secondhand account is usually when an author does research about something or reads something themselves and then recounts it or uses multiple sources to get information and then writes about it. So if you guys think about when you write explanatory texts, those are that's research based, right? You go in and you research something and then you write about it. So that kind of writing is a secondary source because you weren't there, right? Like if I asked you to use this book to write about the Holocaust, well, you're going to go in and you're going to find evidence and then you're going to write about it, right? That's your research. You weren't there. You didn't experience the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that your writing isn't worth reading, right? And isn't helpful. So let's think about that. How is that related to author's point of view? When we talk about an author's point of view, we talk about how they're feeling about a certain situation. So if we are given a first-hand account and a second-hand account, which one is going to tell us more about the author's point of view? Probably a first-hand account, right? That's going to give us more of their feelings and their opinions about what's happening. And then author's purpose is the reason that they're writing a text. Well, when we read a first-hand account, a lot of times an author has more invested in their writing. It's more connected to their heart and their feelings. And when we read a secondhand source, it's not, or a secondhand account, it's not as connected to their feelings. It's research, right? They weren't there. Just like when you tell a story about something that happened, you're more invested in it if you really experienced it rather than if it's someone else's story, right? Okay, we talked about how a first-hand account gives us a lot more about the author and their feelings and opinions. And a second-hand account gives us more different perspectives of different people and different sources that might have been around while it was happening. So it's not that one is better than the other, but they serve different purposes. A secondhand account really educates us about it, and a first-hand account often tries to get us to understand it in a certain way. Okay, and that can also affect our feelings, right? This book was written from the perspective of a Jewish girl who went through the Holocaust. Well, that affects how we feel about the Holocaust and about World War II. We could also go back and we read that Emily Schindler, she wrote a memoir. So we could go and read it from her perspective. And that might give us different feelings about the Holocaust because she's writing it from a German person, from a Christian German person's perspective who was not imprisoned during the Holocaust. So we would get different feelings from that and a different perspective and opinion from that as well. Okay? All right, today we're going to read chapter 11. And the title of chapter 11 is Return to a Dangerous City. And in this chapter, we are going to see Rena go back to Krakow, to Poland. She will be liberated from Oskar Schindler's camp, from his factory, and she will be free. And we'll see what kind of happens after that. So we have some pictures up here of Jewish people and what was happening to them when they returned home after the Holocaust. Just keep in mind that a lot of the families were separated and many, many, many people died during the Holocaust. And some people, as they were going through the Holocaust, didn't realize that their family members and their friends had died. So I want you to think about, as we read through, I want you to think about Rena's point of view of her life after she was liberated, after she was freed, after she was let to go home. And I want you to think about how it might be different if this text was a second-hand account instead of a first-hand account. If someone else was telling us about how the Jews were liberated, how might this be different? And the quote that's going to stick with us today is, survivors will tell you that they will never be free from the terrible memories of what they went through. I want you to think about that too, okay? All right, we're going to go ahead and read. Chapter 11, Return to a Dangerous City. Now I will tell you what happened to me and my mother. The day after Oskar and Emily drove away, a Russian soldier on horseback rode up to the factory. He called out to us, "You are free." Were we really free? Survivors will tell you that they will never be free from the terrible memories of what they went through. The starvation, torture, humiliation, and murder of so many innocent people. Each of us reacted differently to our liberation. Some chose to walk home to Krakow, more than 200 miles away. Others, including my mother and me, decided to wait until the Russians could arrange for a train to take us home. Near the Amalia factory in Brunlitz, my mother and I found a little cottage that had been abandoned by its Czech owners. We stayed there for a few days until word reached us that a train was ready to take us to Krakow. At the Brunlitz station, friendly Russian soldiers helped us climb into boxcars. There were maybe 150 of us, finally on our way home. The train was not like the terrible one that had brought us to Auschwitz. In this one, the soldiers had kindly provided wooden beds with blankets and food and water. When you get back to Krakow, the soldiers warned us, don't go outside at night. Sorry guys, my niece is asleep. I had to make sure she wasn't awake. Don't go outside at night. Some Polish people don't want you there, and there could be trouble. After all we had been through, we had hoped that people in Krakow would be sympathetic and welcome us home. That did not happen. Anti-Semitism was still strong in Poland, and we would have to be careful. After 2 days, the train arrived. People at the train station told us there was a refugee agency set up to help Jews returning to Krakow. We walked to the agency's address, a building that had previously been a school. We were hoping to be assigned a place to live and to find news of our family. The walls of the offices were covered with messages on pieces of paper. My name is so-and-so. Do you know anyone from my family? We did not find our names anywhere. No one here was looking for us. Not any of my father's 6 brothers, or their wives, or children. Not any of my grandparents, cousins, aunts, or uncles. Eventually, I found 2 of my 11 cousins who were still alive, as well as my father's sister. No one else from our family had survived. A Russian official told us we could stay in a college dormitory that had been converted into a shelter, but my mother didn't want us to live like that anymore, with strangers crowded into one room. First, we wondered if we could move back into our old apartment, so we walked from the station to our street, entered our building, and climbed the stairs. When we got to the apartment, we discovered someone had moved in. He told us he was a lawyer, and because the landlord didn't know if we were ever going to come home, he had been allowed to rent the apartment from the time we left. We were not surprised to find someone living in our place. We had no hard feelings about it and didn't blame him for moving into our apartment. How was he supposed to know we would survive? Okay, so stop for a second and think about how Rena's taking all of this. They waited in an abandoned house for a train that took 2 days to finally get them to their home. And when they got there, someone else was living in their apartment. Now Rena says, we had no hard feelings about it and didn't blame him. After all that they're going through, and they don't have a place to live, and Rena's just like, well, who can blame him? Right? She's taking this very well, very hopeful. The apartment was very much as we had left it in 1941 when we were forced to move into the Krakow ghetto. The same color paint was on the walls, and the same lamps were hanging from the ceiling. The same linoleum covered the floor, and my parents' clothes closet and wooden bench were still there. But we didn't stay long. The apartment was no longer our home. We had to find a new place to live. The fabric, shoes, and vodka given to us by Oscar proved useful. We were able to sell these items, so there was some money for food and rent. Eventually, we found an apartment to rent, although it wasn't nice. I had to pour hot water onto the mattress to get rid of its bed bugs, but at least it was our own place, and that was a lucky thing. So now they're living in an apartment that they're paying for that has bugs all over it. And Rena says we're lucky. Tells you a lot about our author, right? As the Russian soldiers had warned us, many people were not happy about Jews returning to Krakow. On several occasions, they tricked Jews by telling them, "You can sleep here tonight," and during the night they murdered them. We stayed in Krakow a month or so, but life there was too dangerous. Every day there were outbursts of anti-Semitism. How strange to return to the place where I had grown up, a place I loved, only to realize it would never be the same again. The streets of Krakow were stained with Jewish blood. The Jewish population was all but gone, murdered by the Nazis. Krakow was no longer a place where we could rebuild our lives, and my mother and I looked for somewhere else to go. A girl I had known before the war heard we were back and came to visit. We described for her how uncomfortable we felt in Krakow and how much we wanted to find some other place to live. "Many Jewish survivors have gone to Austria," she said, "to live in a displaced persons camp, a DP camp. I hear it's comfortable there, and Jews don't have to worry about being attacked. Why not try there?" My mother and I agreed that this sounded like a good plan. Just as we were about to leave for the DP camp in Linz, Austria, we had another visitor. This time it was a boy who had been our neighbor in the Krakow ghetto. "Rena, I have a surprise for you," he said. "Your friend Sonia from the Krakow ghetto is alive. She and her sister and brother-in-law are all living on a farm not far from the DP camp where you are going. I will take you to her." In the days after the end of the war, camp survivors were allowed to ride trains and buses for free. When at last we arrived in Linz and found our way to the farm, Sonia and I fell into each other's arms and wept like babies. We wept for the murder of her parents. We wept for the murder of my father. We wept for all the innocent Jewish men, women, and children who had been murdered. When we had shed all the tears we could, we fell back into our old ways of talking about everything. About boys and food, and laughing like we used to do to chase away the sadness. In Linz, I found a job as a typist and translator for the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, UNRRA, an agency that provided food, shelter, and other necessities to victims of the war. Sonia found a job with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS, an organization that provided humanitarian aid and assistance to refugees. We earned some money and swore to never be separated again. In Linz, I also met my future husband. So a much happier mood that we're reading here, right? She was liberated and life was tough, but she, throughout everything, was so hopeful and just kept telling herself how lucky she was, even after all the terrible things she had been through. So it says a lot about our author, right? A lot. It's nice to see this story turning around. So this is the last chapter that we're going to read this week. And next week, we're going to really quickly finish up this book. We really only have like 3 chapters left. We're probably going to finish it in about 2 days next week. And then we're going to start a new one. So I want you to think about the author's purpose, about the author's point of view, and about how the fact that this is a first-hand account affects our understanding of these events as a reader. Okay? All right. If you are finishing this before the week is over, if this chapter does really have you on a Thursday, then tomorrow you're going to get to do an extension writing task, just like we did last week, but with a little bit more added on. Okay? So keep an eye out for that lesson. That will come soon. All right, kiddos. Love you, miss you, mean it.